My name is Michael. I was born and grew up went to school in Australia. My parents were born in Australia. My grandparents immigrated from Greece in 1904. This presentation reflects my love for the nation of Indonesia and the many years I have studied the language and many wonderful people I met. A focal aspect of my cultural inventory will demonstrate how globalisation transformed my identity as a language learner. In doing so, this presentation illustrates myself as both a product and agent of globalisation. My first interest in Indonesia developed in high school when undertaking Indonesian language as a subject in the HSC in 1979 at a small government school in the inner west of Sydney. I can vividly remember a book in my parents' bookcase called Beautiful Indonesia, which I regularly read and which prompted my thoughts towards the concept of a culture that was geographically Australia's nearest neighbour with a population of 200 million people and the largest Islamic nation in the world. Although I'd never left Australia at this time, these kinds of curious facts stirred my consciousness to know more, and it was as if my everyday environment and view of the world had been altered. Such feelings can be related to Beck and the concept of transnational place polygamy, or being in love with or married to two places at the same time. And my history of many trips, study, teaching and relationships with Indonesia since this time in my life confirms that this period inaugurated a global gateway to globality in my life and globalisation of my biography as a result. However, when I went to school, there was no mobile phones or home computers. Can you imagine a time then when there was no internet as an educational or communicational resource for learning a language? And foreign cultures were simply described in geography class as people who lived in other parts of the world. Our learning environment was limited to books, news media such as newspapers, the classroom itself, and our Indonesian language teacher. And it was through these limited resources which shaped my own identity as a learner, and I was fascinated by foreign language and societies, which has been to me a very important aspect of my life since. You may say the seeds of my identity were set in this period, and this identity reflected myself as a product of globalisation shaped by the relative and limited global forces of the time, and an agent of globalisation due to the knowledge I gained and shared with peers and educators in pursuit of my unconventional learning goals. Peterson refers to culture shaping communities as learned behaviour through a shared system of symbolic meanings embedded in our surroundings, which are learned, adaptive until habitualised. In a sense, this definition may reflect my Indonesian language acquisition prior to the internet was learnt through the cultural inflows of books as objects, the symbolic meanings in these books being the text and the sound and gestures represented by cassettes and the Indonesian language teachers I had at the time. However, development of the internet redefined globalised processes and concepts of culture which reshaped my identity as a language learner and global citizen. Rather than researching for hours and sourcing information, the internet allowed cross-cultural knowledge could be accessed at the stroke of a keyboard. Communication technology has reshaped modern interpretations of globalisation. Through the internet, the shrinkage of time and space has resulted in increasing networks of interconnectedness and interdependence of social and cultural knowledge across national boundaries. And with such social change, new interpretations of a global culture. Cultural globalisation refers to cross-border flows of national and transnational cultures, and the transmission of ideas, meanings and values around the world in such a way as to extend and intensify social relations. Then my overseas trips, and while in Indonesia, are examples of cross-border flow of my national culture as a product of globalisation, because I was privileged to grow up in a society that permitted us access to enhanced education and knowledge, which I could carry into a new and less fortunate community. And as an agent of globalisation, in cultural, the experiences of intersections with many students and staff I met while studying and teaching in Indonesia and formed social networks and bonds for the exchange of information about language inflected with the ways of life and of customs in both Australia and Indonesia. Simple processes such as arranging these trips requires a social interaction by means of internet communication, enabling transnational processes such as booking airline tickets or reserving hotels. These shared experiences, I feel, have redefined myself with multi-local, or more precisely a translocal identity, as described by Salesi, and are confirmed by evaluating my rituals, relationships and restrictions. Due to my immersion into Indonesian society, I am a local and cultured into Indonesian society and the way of life. I have formed strong bonds with the people I love and who have helped me in the past. In Indonesia, people in the local street know my name. I can exchange IDs and knowledge in Indonesian language and feel a warm and inviting acceptance to share views and to develop friendships. Perhaps you can say my head is in Sydney, while my heart longs for Indonesia. Whereas in Sydney, I'm restricted by an impersonal nature of society. I feel victimised due to greater racial discrimination. There is less social cohesion, greater value in materialistic gain, not to mention the exorbitant expense of living. My daily life in Australia richly involves contacting friends by the internet to discuss what's happening in our lives, such as updates of current events and family, reading papers and websites. Through interpersonal communication, I have developed the nuances of language acquisition in a social context. I believe my reformed identity adapts as a result of my Indonesian adventures, which reflected in local behaviours and relates to Hall's description of a new sense of difference or otherness in cultural identity towards a changing world. Like everything which is historical, they undergo constant transformation. I feel I am subject to the continuous play of history, culture and power. In conclusion, I wish to reiterate, through shared experiences, I can enter a less privileged community, home or mosque in Java, behave respectfully and feel welcome. I've always said I can book a ticket out and leave at any time. They, on the other hand, cannot. As an agent of globalisation, I'm conscious of how I interact with others, with knowledge of traditional practices or whether of others' social circumstances and histories, respectful of religions, customs, beliefs and values, without imposing my own, and be welcome. That is my change as a result of cultural globalisation.